and freedom as a version of this, because the two demands focus on the two core structures that shape well-being and opportunity: the political, here is civil rights, and the economic, here as the jobs guarantee. But within efforts to shift and redistribute political and economic power, we must also shift cultural power. Cultural power is foundational because it sets the terms of our economic and political systems. Currently, these terms are set in ways that consolidate and protect power through supremacist worldviews that rely on othering. Cultural power is also primary. One way to think about cultural power is that it is the ability to exert one group's worldview and values in the economic and political systems of society. The interaction between these spheres is mutually reinforcing and reciprocal, such that cultural power is naturalized in economic and political systems. To illustrate this, I want to give you a highly abbreviated example of how cultural power interacts with political and economic power and systems. In this case, looking at how European Christian worldviews are embedded in two key ideas related to land and property. The first idea is terra nullius, or nobody's land, which is a European principle used to erase indigenous relationship to land. And second, John Locke's theory, which was foundational to the United States Constitution, which was that property is gained through one's labor, justifying settlers' claim to land that they homesteaded and farmed, but also invisibilizing indigenous land stewardship practices. In the US, these theories have paved the way for an economic system where land is a commodity and a political system where democratic representation is tied to property ownership. Because of who could own land and participate, this led to a consolidation of economic and political power. For example, at the outset of the Constitution, it's estimated that only 6% of the population, all white men, could vote. On the other hand, when people activate cultural power that disrupts a dominant worldview, we can see how that worldview has been naturalized in the political and economic systems. For example, the Oceti Chakawin's refusal of federal payment for the Black Hills as compensation for the US government taking this land in violation of the Fort Laramie Treaty is an affirmation of cultural and political sovereignty and a rejection of dominant political and economic systems. And art and cultural strategy often work through the symbolic, encoded in story, action, and ritual. In this way, cultural strategy can intentionally transform understandings of economic and political systems without materially transforming them. Here, Rebecca Belmore's piece, created in support of the Mohawk Nation's land defense struggle of the 1990s, located Indigenous voice directly on the land through a direct address to the land. And as I've said, transforming understanding is not necessarily transforming the material conditions that create belonging. And one way to retain power is to heavily police the boundaries of economic and political expertise. This narrows what knowledge is made actionable and whose knowledge is made actionable. And so as a social science institute, we actually work largely in these heavily policed spheres of expertise. You can see the range of things we address, from climate crisis to Islamophobia, housing displacement to public health and policing. This provides opportunities for cultural strategy to show up and to think about how we can shift what knowledge is made actionable. And so in this sense, we actually see artists and cultural practitioners as beautiful and necessary trespassers who shift cultural power. Our understanding of political and economic systems become more insistently human, a little bit messy, complicated, engaging of spirit and soul and healing and joy, the things that, in short, make us belong. And in trespassing, we also illuminate our social systems in ways that shift our approach to co-creating belonging. Another way to think about this is the edge effect, an ecological concept that describes how there's greater diversity of life in the region where the edges of two adjacent ecosystems overlap. At the overlapping edge of ecosystems, you can find species from each ecosystem, as well as unique species that aren't found in either one, but are specially adapted to the conditions of the transition zone between the two edges. These are the type of edge spaces we are creating through cultural strategy as a way to shift cultural power and to make our practices of co-creation, how we think about well-being and opportunity, more insistently human. We are working to shift where and how the ways of knowing and being held by artists and cultural practitioners holds weight and activation. So these images that you saw just a moment ago are from the Staying Power Project in Richmond, California. On the left is a performance of poetry and research findings at a city council meeting that sparked the study and writing of 2 tenant laws. And on the right is a mural that prompted the implementation of a law that had been passed, but was just sitting on the books. And so the mural was put up on the street. And so this morning, we'll get to hear more deeply from 4 projects and how they do this work. I've asked each of them to speak to one of the 4 essential practices of a cultural strategy for belonging at the Institute. So you'll get a specific angle on their work. It's not all of their work, but you'll get a broader picture of how we make this work happen at the Institute. But before we get into that, I want to share 4 learnings, one for each practice, because you know, the first time you get on a bike, sometimes you don't even wear a helmet, you don't even have shoes on, you have a, you know, it's not things, you get better at it basically. And this work really builds on so many beautiful people, organizations, and movements as well. So the first reflection is that in order to shift cultural power, we have to protect the livelihood and the ability to stay or move of artists and cultural practitioners in community. The scarcity and competition we have in arts and culture today pushes us towards further professionalization. Yet nearly everyone I ask, whether an artist or not, has a creative or cultural practice that they would like to spend more time with, but can't because of economic pressure. 2, while amplifying, we also need to protect the right of artists and cultural practitioners to be misunderstood. For who I am and where I sit in an institution, this is an act of decentering. This is a practice that can appear risky, but we need to ask who is being misunderstood, who is doing the work to understand. This can transform us through a bit of humility, openness, and work as well. The third reflection is that we're all tired. People in orgs are strapped. It's been a long couple of years. And so even when we have an aspiration to bring cultural strategy into different sectors, there may not be enough energy, capacity, or time. This points me to the radical potential of care and thinking about, how do we make our work good in the beginning, good in the middle, and also good in the end. And as a fourth reflection, I want to ask, how are we checking for when our narratives outrun our practice? We have to balance between the symbolic and the material, and we need to ask, and we need ways to stay accountable to this balance. Perhaps most importantly, I need to ask myself, when am I trying to convince people of things before I have practiced them myself? A chair is still a chair, even when there's no one sitting there, but a chair is not a house, and a house is not a home. I want to leave you with this lyric that I often think about in this work. Luther Vandross sings the seminal version, in my opinion, but I think about it because it speaks to what arts and cultural strategy brings to creating belonging, the potential to move us from house to home. So I'm going to stop there, I'm going to stop our share. And we will drop and just say thank you all. And we're going to drop the mural board in the chat again. And we're going to break out into groups of 3. And we're going to ask folks just to discuss in your 3, what's resonating, what's inspiring, what questions do you have? We'll have a few minutes to do that in small groups. And as you're doing that, feel free to drop any notes in the mural board as well, just as a way to take notes in there. So we'll jump into breakout rooms now. Jasmine, you can move us over. Thank you all.
Hey, Evan, can you hear me?
Yep.
Maybe, I just realized it may be best to make Toy and I co-hosts. Then we don't have to bother Jasmine to spotlight us if we're going to stay spotlighted. And I think it's best that we stay spotlighted because it seems like there's a lot of it to say. Thank you.
Yeah, let me do that right now.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello. Me. Hi. And my partner, we just joined the meeting a few minutes ago, so we are not sure about what the assignment is for in the breakout.
Okay.
Sorry.
Just hang tight. We're just going to be here for a couple minutes and then we'll jump in. We were just asking what questions you have from the last presentation, any thoughts, any reflections. So no worries. You're good.
Thank you.
You'll catch up in just a moment.
Thanks.
Let's see. And Kathy, I don't know if you're still there. It's not letting me make more co-hosts because we have a few co-hosts. Let me see.
No worries, that's fine. Then I will just let Jasmine know when we're switching.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So that there's potential candidates for Forbes 30 under 30.
Amazing.
We have to send in a picture of us together.
Okay.
I think all of the ones that we have are pretty awkward.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have to table.
Okay. Thank you.
Folks are there's a couple of people who maybe are unmuted that we can hear you walking around, which is nice to know we're in your house, but if you don't want us to hear you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
The breakout room I was in there by myself, room 42.
Okay. Sorry about that. We will check on our end. We are getting used to having this many people, but yeah, thank you for letting us know. And if that happens again, please just hop out and just in the beginning, then we can reassign you into another one. Thank you. All right. So I think as people are, oh no, we still have we'll be closing in just a couple of seconds. All right. Thank you, everyone. I think we're all back now from the breakouts. Let's see. Yes, great. So thanks everyone for jumping into that. We have some technical challenges with the breakout rooms. Appreciate everyone's patience as we get into this. In the next one, if your breakout room doesn't have any people in it, if it's just you, please feel free to hop back into the full group, and then we will reassign you into a breakout room. So thank you for your patience with that. As a reminder, I know people are kind of rolling in at different times. We won't have time to go back through the cultural strategy framework right now, but there will be a recording of the entire framework, and so hopefully you will be able to check that in the future. But you won't miss anything by jumping into these next 4 presentations. So as a visual, just some things that are coming up for people: what was exciting, what resonates, edge points, ideal versus real. Who is being misunderstood and who is doing the work to understand. Let me scroll in. Stop and reflect when you may be asking someone to believe something you haven't done. Appreciate keystones and good practice. Goals versus real world living. So a lot of things coming up for people. Let's see if there's any questions we want to share out. How do white people hold misunderstood and not try to translate or defend? When is protection okay? How can we get our workplaces to acknowledge the land like we did earlier in the presentation? So feel free to keep dropping in questions and things as we go through. We will hopefully get to some of these at the end, and we'll get into that. We're going to change gears and pass it over to our first presenter, other than myself. And let me see if I can get these things. Sorry, there's all these little buttons I gotta click. Here we go. All right, so the rest of our presentation today is gonna be focused on what we call the 4 essential practices for a cultural strategy for belonging. And the first practice is going to be about cultivating vibrant and diverse forms of cultural practice that support the growth of leadership and the practice of those directly and deeply impacted by systems of oppression. And we're going to hear from Alphabet Rockers, who is our current artist in residence, wrapping up this month, actually, for the last year, and their work. So we'll get to hear from Caitlin and Rosa, who are 2 members of the Alphabet Rockers Collective. Unfortunately, Tommy, who was on the bill, was supposed to come today, was unable to make it for health reasons, but he is fine and doing well. But I want to introduce Caitlin and Rosa. So I'll pass it over to you all, and thank you, and take us in.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, everyone. Let's see. Hi, I'm Caitlin. We'll introduce ourselves and then we'll dive in. My name's Caitlin McGaw. I use she, her as my pronouns. I'm a parent of a 2- and 5-year-old. I'm raising them with my husband, Adi, here in the Ohlone land, also known as Oakland, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rosa. I'm DJ for Alphabet Rockers. I go by she, her, also on Ohlone land, here living with my 2.5-year-old son and a partner. So I'm going to start some music as we kick off the presentation.
Right on. So as soon as the first slide drops, I want you all to put your rock up for justice. And this is how we start every engagement, with a rock star. We're here because we know that children's music affects the way children see and feel the world. Can children's music be a part of a radical framework for change? We want you to think about that as we dive in. This is how we entered the industry of children's music, with everyone thinking we needed to look and sound like this person right here. Now, you're listening to the song Until You're Free in the background. What song title do you imagine that this artist is playing for these children? Sometimes it might be something as a distraction or just the ABCs, but the goal that we have here is to disrupt and write and amplify another narrative, because it's our job to not think of music as a break from parenting, but be about co-creating community and leadership. We don't get a break when we're fighting white supremacy. This is the world we started Alphabet Rockers in. And even the 2 of us, Tommy, big love to you, and myself, We were rejected because of Black music forms and because of people's racism, and we never gave up. So we're going to tell you a little bit about our journey in our presentation today. Oh,
So-
we can go. Yes, go ahead.
So where does the work happen with our youth, our children? It's in the everyday moments, and the big questions happen, and we need to be listening. The kids don't schedule with us when to process something big. So imagine how music might do the healing in those moments too. How are we nourishing the future we want to live in? So if we see children as seeds of hope, it's about nurturing and growth and how important our children's spaces are for radical envisioning. We planted the seed and we asked the questions. As you can see in the seed cycle, there is a reciprocity in planting seeds for the future. It's not a fixed moment. And so we can also think about song and music as seed. Why music? It connects our thinking body to our knowing body. It's a way to connect language and message to embodiment. It captures our human experience, as Evan said, in messy ways and complex ways, and cultivates healing and joy. So we want you to take a moment to listen to how these questions plant the seed. And I'll drop a track right now.
What is my color? What is my skin tone? What is its history? What is its culture? What is my culture? What is my culture?
See, when we all have questions, and in our collective, it's different for each of us, as it should be. Can we hold space for diverse questions or diverse answers? We believe that our children are not living in a world of answers, but we are living in a world where we have to make more space for the authentic questions to be heard, to be received, and for us to disrupt our own systems of power as parents, as adults. What if they actually have the answers we need? This is where actually Tommy and I started our work as Alphabet Rockers doing racial justice work. We went into the community. Here we were in Half Moon Bay, invited by a library to do a workshop on racial justice. Now we gathered 3 families in this case, and we sat with what questions do we all hold? From here, this process of asking and receiving information from our community, it's actually the same that we're doing at the Othering and Belonging Institute this year.
So when we continue the seed kind of metaphor, the seed grows with nourishment, as did the questions, as Caitlin mentioned, and the way we listen to our community. And listening actually revealed a convergence of stories and cross-pollination. So who is in our community and how do we hold one another up? How might we build collective power?
We realized in our work that we needed more space for songs of gender diversity. We still need more songs that reflect our various abilities. We need to reimagine discipline. How do we keep ourselves safe in a system that's not built to help us thrive or even just survive? These are words that children left when we were making The Love, an album for gender diverse realities.
So we passed the mic to 60 plus artists who collaborated on our album, The Love. How we hold space on stage with new artists, and how do we nurture and cultivate a diverse roster of artists. So today, stage time and space is limited, but the music is still here.
These are the 4 questions that the children in Alphabet Rockers are holding right now in our music process. How can we create schools that hold diverse narratives? How do we open up people's eyes to someone's internal change? What are ways people can be helped instead of locked up or punished? What are the ways privilege shows up in power? How can the government use the power they have to support others rather than support their own system? This is where questions have brought us. And we are writing an album about really this complex narrative that we don't have the future answers to. Here we are in front of a mural in downtown Oakland that reflects just that envisioning. What about a radical future of liberation? Can we live there together? This is the place we need to come from as artists and as leaders and as parents, is a commitment to that space, and let our children envision it with us. Here we are taking pen to paper, and over the next few months, if you follow Alphabet Rockers, we'll be able to share the songs that our young people created from their deep questions. And what are the questions that you want to bring to this space? We invite you to start jotting these down.
And we're not just a collective that writes music. There are many forms of creative expression that we lift up and cultivate, including poetry, dance, meditation, wordplay, physical play. We embrace multiple creative gifts and forms in order to ask those questions and to shift and build collective power with our youth. And so through the pandemic, we started a virtual creative club, a virtual gathering where we leverage the arts to acknowledge, dismantle, and reimagine with our kids all the systems that don't serve us. So we asked, how can we break our biases? How can we use a poem to embrace our power? How do we take care of ourselves and our community? So who is leading? The roots, the branches? How can we be mutually strengthening?
It's important because oftentimes there's a misthinking around our children are the ones, but guess what? We all are the ones. Everything we pour into our children mutually strengthens us as adults. So here's the question, as we talk about the prison industrial complex, as we talk about how society is actually unfair with young people, do we lose any joy? Or does our abolitionist practice reveal our joy? What do you lose when you recognize another person's power? When is this ignored or diminished in our relationship with young people? In our creative practice with you today, we ask you, what song will you sing? So we want you to get really creative and start thinking about what song, if you were a child, what song would you have wanted to hear so that you could create a world of belonging? And what is the song today that you might need? Because music may change. Here's an example. Right now, we're writing a song called Get You a Friend, about that radical friend who will stand up for you no matter what. We have a song called The Change Up, which is written by T3PO in our group, and it's all about how we need to allow people to change. You can make a mistake, but that mistake should not follow you. Another title is Our Turn. That's Maya's song about how it's time for her to have the mic and for us to listen up. But we invite you to really create with us because we need you. Just like we needed those families when we went to Half Moon Bay, what is the song that you need to hear in the world? Thank you.
So if we take a moment, folks can join in the mural board again. Sarah, if you could redrop the link in there, and we're just gonna have about 5 minutes to put in any titles of songs that you wanted to hear when you were a kid, or any titles of songs that you need today. And we'll redrop that link is in there now. You can click on that, and you can move on over to the second section and play with that. We'll have about 5 minutes for that. Thank you.
There's some great questions in the chat too, which I think, Evan, you want us to deal with at the end, maybe?
Yeah.
Great. Well, in Alphabet Rockers, we have a tradition of throwing shine on folks for being authentically themselves. So we'll be throwing shine on you right now for dropping some great titles in here. One of them I saw is I Am Enough. And actually, that was the theme of our album, The Love. So we wanted our young people to know that you are enough exactly as you are. I am not a math equation, not half this, half that. I am one whole being. We wrote a song actually called What Are You? About that horrible question. It's right there with Where Are You From? When it's actually just coded language for sorting.
I love how this one, the take up space, it became a diamond, so it doesn't fit.
Yes. I love the note self-love. We wrote a song called I'm Proud, and our youth sing it loud and proud every time we perform it. So that's great. I wish I had that song when I was a kid too.
I'm interested in humans are messy. Thank you, Coffee. You are not alone? Who just wrote that?
What?
Whoa. Okay. I have to get it.
So we'll take about another, oh, there's the book, You're Not Alone.
Yes.
We're so in line with y'all, but everything you add might inspire us, so full warning.
All right, so bring it in, and thank you all. We're gonna slowly transition back into bringing the group back together. Feel free to keep playing in the mural board in the time, and thank you, Caitlin and Rosa. You know, the work is so it's been so wonderful to work with you over this past year. So I'm gonna switch us over now, and we're gonna dig into the second practice. The second practice of cultural strategy for belonging. So the second one is to amplify the knowledge, insight, and vision that comes through culture and cultural production, and create containers and experiences where this knowledge, insight, and vision can be expressed and understood on its own terms. And so to do that, we are going to get to hear from a project called Cultures of Care, and from Giovanna. So Gio, I'm going to pass it over to you, and we will get started. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. My name is Giovanna Fisher. I am she, they pronouns, and I'm coming from Los Angeles and Tongawa land. And it's a pleasure to be here this morning. To talk about cultures of care. I am an educator, curriculum designer, and cultural strategist. Been in schools, outside of schools, really looking to bring practices of creativity to young people who don't normally have access to those. Looking at creativity as a practice of care, but now we'll get into Cultures of Care, which is a project that I've been working on with Evan here at the Othering and Belonging Institute, really to amplify these practices of care across like domains of work. And so we'll get into that a little bit more. But for now, let's think about care. I'm just going to say the word 3 times, and I invite you to say the word out loud if you feel comfortable as well. Care, care, care. And just notice what comes up for you, what images might come up for you, what ideas. Feel free to tag them in the mural board, and we'll get back to those later. So we've talked to many people across many domains of work, and Sonia Passi, one thing she said, the thing any of us should be really trying to do with our time, energy, and talent is to create space for people to take care of themselves. And really, if we're thinking about care, thinking about what is required to bring this into our work, wherever it is. We started thinking about this really in a time where I think care was showing up for many of us in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. And the context always prompts the important questions if we're listening correctly. This image is one of Naeem Agreem at George Floyd Square in Minneapolis above Cup Foods, where he was murdered. And really was a call, I think, yeah, to think about care or the lack of care in our lives. We saw during that time with such absence of care, we saw people really showing up to care for one another. And it really prompted us, whether we felt moved to care for other people, whether we were feeling an absence of care in our life, whether we were feeling an abundance of care in our life, people all around were inspired to really show up for each other, even people they didn't know. The Auntie Sewing Squad, who's some of the work that we covered, they really were making masks in a moment where PPE was not available, and thinking about how radical of an idea it is to care for people that we've never seen before. And this has been happening for so long. However, we really saw an insurgence of this during this period of time. And we started to think about this question of care. And it's in those points of connection, in connecting with people, strangers or not, that we start to get in touch with our own humanity. Jason Reynolds, a young adult author, has said, "I know you because I know me. And the only way I can write something that connects to you is if I know me. I have to be intimately connected to the human parts of myself because it's the human parts of me that are going to be connected to the human parts of you." And in this, in these points of connection, we're thinking about what is the radical potential of care for the future of our people, planet, and all living things. Caring for one another is inherently transformative and has the potential to transform systems. People have been caring for themselves, each other, and the planet in ways that our current systems cannot and will not. And so what we're seeing is in the absence of our systems caring for us, we're seeing people get innovative and creative with how they care for one another, how they care for the planet. And in the name of amplifying these practices, this is what this project intended to do. However, we must acknowledge that many people have been thinking about this idea of care as systems change work, as transformative for so long. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. The Black Panthers have centered holistic care in the design of their programs and how they showed up for the community for so long. Leah Lakshmi Tapenza Samarasina has written Care Work, really sharing the wisdom that's come from disability justice and how that informs how we're thinking about care and who receives care and what care is visible and what care is not. And Indigenous fire practices has reminded us of how we've cared or haven't cared for land and what's to be learned there. So in these interviews with many people across many domains of work, we've seen that across many practices, care is inherently transformative of systems. This is systems change work, regardless of where one finds themselves and what kind of work they are doing. Care is part of it, and it's required to make these changes. And so we're going to share a little bit more about this. However, I want to go back to one of the practices that Evan brought to our attention. And it's essential that we do not need to translate the work of everybody that we're talking about or anyone's work in here to prove that it is care work. We're learning from it as it is, and we're trusting that the people who are doing the work with the intention. So Elliot Kukla, he's a rabbi and he works in care in the grieving spaces grief and dying. And he has discussed like invisible labor, and he's so much informed by the wisdom of disability justice. And he shares so much about how it took being with people at the end of life and being with sick people to recognize the fact that everyone's life is interdependent and everyone is depending on care. And we don't notice the labor that goes into building a door, like we notice the labor that goes into building a ramp, because the door is just always there. Someone had to build the door as well. And so in this work, thinking about how noticing all of these forms of labor are indeed acts of care, and amplifying those. In our conversations with Jason Reynolds, he touched so much on bringing young people in the room as a form of care. And so what about these intergenerational spaces and bringing in young people's voices is a form of caring for them, but also bringing care into transforming systems that they're implicated in, that they're involved in, schools, libraries, institutions. Why don't they have a say in how these are designed, in what these look like, in how they're going to serve them? And he shares the reason we don't ask them is because we don't respect them. We don't look at them as whole humans. We look at them as half-formed beings, is what he said. And so what does it mean to look at young people as whole humans? In conversation with Naima Green, who is a photographer and educator, she really discussed this idea of archives of the future. How is building archives, our artists and our writers and people participating in all forms of creative practices? What archives in the past? What are the archives that we've been familiar with in our own lives? What was missing from them? And how did that not care for us? And what would it mean for these archives in the future to be so inclusive of everything that we haven't seen, of experiences that maybe parallel ours or don't, that really push us to think in new ways, and that are really inclusive of so many experiences. And in conversations with Rich Medina, who's a DJ, and Nikki Jiz, who's a drag queen based in the Bay Area, we really started to think about these like spaces of joy and connection, and how those are indeed spaces of care as well. And what does it mean to center those in the work that we're doing? During the pandemic, thinking about weak ties a lot. Weak ties are a sociological term used to define these small connections that we have with people that maybe, we don't talk to them every day. They're not our friends or our family. They're people when we're walking down the street. It's the person in the bodega. It's the person at the grocery store. And you share this interaction with them, and that's still a relationship. And a lot of sociological research supports the fact that these are caring relationships. They support us in our day-to-day. And so these spaces for joy and connection really, cultivate those weak ties, care for us. These conversations have been spaces of provocations. They're not solutions. They're just like a sample of practices, and it's just the beginning. However, it's important to amplify them because they can help us understand how care can transform our lives and society, regardless of the domains of work or where we find ourselves living. I'm going to bring us back to the quote that we started with from Sonia Passy, who she said the thing any of us should be really trying to do with our time, energy, and talent is to create space for people to take care of themselves. In this work, I started to think about what was noticeable was how care informs everybody's work, period. It's a lens, regardless of what you work for. And then it brought me back to my own work to think about how my work could be informed by thinking more deeply about care. What happens when I start to center it more intentionally?
Oh, sorry, Gio. Do you want me to play the video? Do you want me to play the teaser, or do you want to go to?
Yeah, I think there were two more.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But yeah, we can do the teaser though.
Okay. Do you want to introduce it while I get set up?
Yeah. So what we're all about to see is a teaser video for the launch of the Cultures of Care project, which will include videos, interviews with these people that we've been in conversation with, centering care, really thinking about care, pushing us to think about care in new ways. And it'll include learning materials and learning guides for people to incorporate into their classrooms, into any kind of like community space, to push our thinking in this way. To amplify.
There's never been a moment in the history of the world where gratitude has been a bad thing.
All any of us should really be trying to do with our time and energy and talent is create space for people to be able to take care of themselves.
People care for each other and the planet in ways that our current systems cannot and will not. What is the radical potential of care for the future of people, planet, and all living things?
As long as we're all exhausted, we're never going to be able to dream how to get there. So the first step is having the time to dream. And that feels hard to imagine. Like, how are we going to get to a place where we all really have time to rest and dream? It's not an individual responsibility to make your time to rest, but a collective one that we all have time to rest.
Wonderful. Yeah, and so when we head to the mural board, if you feel moved, really thinking about how you, in your own work, how can you apply this lens of care to build upon or grow the work that you're already doing? It's not about creating new work, but really how can care inform the work that you're currently doing? And how might this shift or evolve your work?
Cool. So if we jump into the mural board, we'll take a few minutes, probably about 4 minutes to work through that. There's no sharing or breakouts with this one, but it's just time for you to have some personal reflections. So yeah, take a couple minutes to work through that, and we'll come back for the third presentation in just a few. Thank you, Gio.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for adding all these beautiful reflections. Gio, I don't know if you have any that are particular, or move over to our next. Have any thoughts that you want to close us out with?
Yes. I mean, it's really beautiful to see the ways people are thinking about this in their specific, I think, domains of work. But there's a huge call for like rest and dreaming, I think, is one of the trends that's showing up a lot. And yeah, I think it's just like a beautiful indicator to see that we're there, that we're arriving at a space of collectively everyone's like looking at the need for rest and dreaming as something that needs to be systematized. And that's really beautiful to see. I mean, and we have hopes, right? Because I think everyone in this room, we might have that vision. And it's about making the change where it becomes a vision for the systems at large.
Beautiful. Thank you, Gio, for sharing.
Thank you.
And reflecting on cultures of care. And if you have specific questions for Gio, please drop them in the chat as well. And we don't have the Q&A function on this, but you can do like an @ sign or just put Gio's name in it, or for any of actually any questions you have for any of us. If we have time at the end for a large group discussion, we'll get into those. But I'm going to turn us now to thank you everyone for yeah, it's beautiful to see these mural boards being populated. So we're going to change gears a little bit now, and we're going to switch over to talking about practice 3, which is to align with efforts for material, political, and social change. So this practice 3 is around alignment, and we are going to get to hear from the work of Richmond Land and Valerie Jameson, who will be taking us through that. So Valerie, if you're still there, I will pass it over to you. And if Valerie could get spotlighted, and then we'll jump in. So thanks, Val.
Hey, thank you for that intro, Evan. Wanting to add, I am also on unceded Chochenyo Lonely territory. Richmond, California is where we're based in Contra Costa County. I am not only the founding executive director, but I'm a homegrown Richmond resident. Someone who's rooted here, someone who's politicized, growing up here, organizing here, being a youth here. I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, I'm a learner, I'm a mover and a shaker. And that is all really critical to the work of Richmond Land, because it is work that is informed by people. And specifically, as we go into the next slide, you'll see the conversation of our organization as an emerging community land trust, as an organization that is moving to build people power, and that is political power, cultural power for the purposes of maintaining permanence and having staying power, is really understanding that this both includes placemaking with placekeeping. I really love this mural. It's around the corner from my house, and it says, "Keep Richmond Beautiful." There's also really important people in my life who are showcased in the visual, and it starts to ask a really critical question about what is home, what is place, and really what is at the core of what we're protecting and what we're fighting for when we talk about displacement prevention. What's the work we want to honor? What's the work that we're tending, and what are we creating? And a lot of that has to, we have to really unmask where this work departs from. And so this visual shows a little bit of the origins to even our logo, and understanding that there's a lot of fractures when we talk about conversations of land. When we talk about conversations around affordable housing, it's recognizing land disposition and land theft as really being central to many of our BIPOC communities' understanding and relationship to housing, relationship to land. And so recognizing those painful roots are really critical for understanding how many people come in to the work of radical land projects. And I like to think of it as a prism. I like to think of this work as iterative, because there's so much of what we have to do is really understanding that we are an alternative anti-capitalist model that is really having to navigate systems that really encroach these these very conventional methods of market-driven development, market-driven real estate. And what we have to do is then redirect that and iterate that. And what comes out is so much recognizing that we have to change the rules of engagement. We have to shift people's perspective. We have to tell stories. We have to unearth so much of what is included in the process of maintaining our city and having a community determined future. And that transformation is based on this iteration. With the community land trust, because there's so many different forms, I like to break it down, each word, and really at the end of the day, we're an organization that is led by people who grew up here, have been impacted here, have cultural and social roots here. And so the community component is really essential, as is land. I mean, at its core, we're really talking about being able to maintain, reclaim land for the purposes of stewarding that. And none of that is possible without doing that in a trusting way. None of that is possible without unmasking what does it really mean when we talk about stewarding land and for what purpose. And that's where shared struggle and shared legacy is really core to the work that we do and transcends the real estate transaction, the political advocacy, and we're talking about something deeper. We're talking about rectifying and mending so much of those fractured harms. And I also think about, fractures, but it's also fractal. Like, we're a translocal organization. That's why we have this visual of the succulent here. And we have this wonderful structure that represents the 7 generations, because so much of the work of a land trust, really working to steward land for 99 years of continued affordability and public benefit, is recognizing that we're fighting for something that is collective, and rejecting what we don't want to keep that was harmful in our past, and really claiming towards the vision and the future that we deserve. One way that we've done this in the past is needing to really understand one another and where we're coming into this process. And so a lot of times in our community, we're not able to see across cultural lines. And this experience of launching the Richmond is Home program was really critical for telling the story of people who, in this case, Laotian Americans who migrated here, had been displaced during the Vietnam War, and what their notions of home within Richmond meant. And for them, it was more than place. It was more than the building. It was about the community. It was about the collective village and the collective well-being across generations. And so much of that is what we aim to foster, because this visual here, I like to talk a lot about Richmond is such a distinct place, right? Concentric circles. On the left, you'll see this, what I call an optical illusion. Gentrification makes us think that things are improving, the quality of life is getting better, but we are actually more disconnected as it may seem intact and whole. We are not seeing one another. We are more misunderstood. We feel and we belong less than when we are really working to intertwine those stories, however challenging, however painful they may be. It's really recognizing that there's an opportunity for us to connect and really know and understand each other in a more intimate way. And the next slide will share a little bit of one of those other projects. Southside Talks was an opportunity for us to further cross-cultural conversations. And this time it was with the Black and Brown community. And this is really important because, again, right, we, with our communities being able to inhabit similar space, but not necessarily understanding our deeply rooted histories, so much is lost, so much is misunderstood. And you're seeing a visual of one of our Building Power Fellows, Jenny, who's here and actually started making connections to their background and their story, which you're seeing a quote on the left about them, to the need for different alternative housing models. And in this case, it was the accessory dwelling unit that they felt would actually enhance social cohesion in a time when so many people are not talking about the push out and displacement that so many Black residents have already experienced in Richmond due to the previous foreclosure crisis. So where does that leave us now? Having been through yet another destabilizing period and continuing to experience the impacts of the pandemic and the economic systems, we really are still forcing the question around what does it mean to have a just recovery? And everyone must continue to stay housed amid another destabilizing period with the housing market and the uncertainty around it. And so this is the opportunity for us to create linkages between affordable housing, kind of renter tenant protections. What does that mean for preservation? And that's a really wonky word, but it's talking about how do we stabilize our communities and keep them whole. And stability, we need to really unmask like what is really happening beyond our ability to be stable. And so this example that I'm showing you here is a really momentous one. It's a moment to celebrate because we are in contract to acquire our first property, and it's a stabilization property that is rooted in the history in the corner of, you know, a lot of market and corporate landlord pressures of swapping up properties in places like Richmond, where real estate is slightly cheaper than other parts of the Bay Area, and we really bore the brunt of the affordability and the housing crisis and the housing exploitation of the region. And in this situation, the former landlord Dale Riggins here on the left, unfortunately, the property was foreclosed despite this being his generational home. And if it were not for the deep love and solidarity between him and the tenants below him, and you're seeing Cynthia on the right is one of the tenants, we wouldn't have found this case, and we wouldn't have been able to really unmask what was at the core of this foreclosure and been in the opportunity to stabilize it, which we are in now. So it's really exciting. Another aspect of our work, because we talked about placemaking in the beginning, is recognizing that there is so much vacant, underutilized, underdeveloped land, and there's so much need that community members have expressed for generations. And in North Richmond, we're seeing that the neighborhood is in a critical period of change, where there is over 20% of the housing stock is actually vacant, and people know it's the calm before the storm. What's going to happen when those parcels are disposed of? Who's going to have control of those parcels, and for whose benefit? And so a lot of our work is really reframing the narrative, not just going after being able to acquire the parcels, but talking about how do we really push the idea of those parcels not being vacant. Those parcels were once homes, you know, those homes are things that our communities deserve. And so that brought us to an event we hosted last year, which we'll be doing again this year. And that's the North Richmond light display, What We Deserve. And this was a really critical event because at the time it was the second wave of the pandemic. There wasn't a lot of opportunity to gather. This was one of the few times we could gather in person because people were doing it at different intervals. And it was really to force the question about what do our communities deserve? Love and dignity and housing and stability. What you're gonna start to see throughout these other slides in the blue are excerpts from a public land workshop where we co-created a written poem that we then incorporated into a video called For the Love of Culture. And so you'll be able to see those. And I want to read out the next one, which is, there is still pride on our hands. There is still love on this land. And that is being demonstrated here by another event that we hosted on the sites, which was a community build day. It was an opportunity to talk about different housing models, to show community what's possible and what's real, and forcing the question of, you know, these are not vacant vessels. Like, community really wants to tend to them and care for them. And that is forcing and asserting our right to stay and our right to the parcels themselves. I mentioned the For the Love of Culture video, and another great thing that we did was interweave. Many people know the really famous Otis Redding song, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. We have two phenomenal artists. Many people know both of these individuals. So Dante Clark, longtime North Richmond resident, did a rendition of the Otis Redding song, and you see a quote from how he wordsmithed it, how he shifted it, and then how we were able to then recreate the version that was incorporated into the collective poem that North Richmond residents made. And so we're seeing our work in Richmond land and our desire to push for stabilizing residents, for co-creating values-aligned development, also shifting hearts and minds, and also elevating stories of hope while not erasing the harm and what's been suffered and what's been experienced in North Richmond, which is something that's really critical in this work. I want to read this element out of that collective poem. So the power of the people will birth a transformation, one that revives the lives of our community, that replants the seeds we need to trust, to grow, to build. We strengthen our collective healing. And so, you know, thinking back to the visual of our logo, so much of our work, it's iterating, continuing to understand that there's fractures and there's mending, and we're working towards a really challenging situation, and there's renewal and there's rebirth. And you're seeing the purple collard green, which is our city's plant that has its own really critical history manifested in real time here, and was shown in the aspects of the video, the For the Love of Culture video. You've seen visuals of some of the Building Power Fellows. This is Princess here. And as we're continuing to do community activation projects, it's in tandem with working towards a development concept. And so in this case, it is the North Richmond Eco Village. And this, similar to the visuals that you all saw about public land and community hands, is recognizing, you know, as community members who live in North Richmond, who tend to North Richmond, there are growers, there's a farm. These folks need to be able to remain. And this is a viable housing project that is values aligned. And so Princess being able to be quoted in a different video saying that now, you know, she doesn't see this as an individual challenge. You know, she is seeing her work as part of collective healing and collective transformation. And that is more significant in the work of a community land trust than just trying to be a housing provider, than just taking properties off the speculative market. It's about fostering the belief that we're in this together. And so that vision is growing. You know, that is those are 2 parcels, but there are many scattered sites and the main campus that you all saw a map of. And so we're continuing to assert our right to home and to place. And the Garamita Street Initiative is one that we're raising up to talk about the need to revitalize a 5-block stretch. And how do we create livable, walkable corridors that people deserve and have deserved for a long time, and start to integrate the conversation of stabilization and anti-displacement with that of a right to return. North Richmond is also in that place where how do we engage in those conversations about former Les Deltas public housing residents coming back, or people who've already been priced out or left North Richmond because it didn't have what they needed, or they just couldn't sustain their livelihood there. And there's really great opportunities to do that. And so my last slide is one of the final pieces of that collective poem is we deserve to reimagine a neighborhood that thrives, a neighborhood that's free, that frees. We are the medicine we seek. And that's the takeaway. You know, we're one translocal iteration of a longer effort, and we're doing our part because we care about the communities that we grew up in and that we tend to and that we hold. And so much of the work that we're doing is reimagining what's possible and growing that vision. And so as you can see, the final visual is thinking about a North Richmond that is fully in its power, fully healed. And that includes one that in this case doesn't center Chevron, which is so much a part of our story and so much of who we feel we have to be. And we want to be able to have a vision where our community iterates and shares what we deserve, not necessarily what we're fighting. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Valerie. Do you want to introduce the activity part of it?
Yeah, I could do that. I know there's probably not as much time, but what I'll say, so, you know, it's a little bit of people's choice. I did list 2 questions up, and I'm hoping that you all will indulge me in creating some changes. So there is an images icon all the way on the left of your sidebar. So I encourage you all to either click the images and populate those, you know, use the draw function and really share with us. The question has disappeared. But it's really wanting you all, you know, regardless of where you're coming from, to be able to share. Yes. Well, that's the second question. So that's all good, you know, so I do want to still, hopefully you all can incorporate, you know, what are some sights, what are some sounds, what are some feelings and emotions that are invoked when you think about honoring and preserving your home. So not necessarily, you know, Richmond and Contra Costa County, but when you think of your home, What feelings does it invoke? What do you want to share with the rest of us? And if you are so called on the bottom, you know, there's always a call to action. So much of our work is action-based. Please feel free to write in a sticky how you want to preserve and sustain communities for the future. So thank you.
Great, and we'll take, with time, we'll take about 4 minutes just to do this. Thank you all. There's no rush. We will be able to return to the mural boards. You'll continue to have access to these mural boards. We will also be sharing the slides and the video of all of this as well. So again, just as a reminder that we are moving fast. We recognize this. We apologize for it, but we want to be able to share this information, and hopefully you can return to it as well. Thank you, Valerie. That was beautiful. Got a lot of love in the chat as well.
Thank you all for adding so many wonderful visuals to this. And one thing I didn't state, because I wanted to allow just a moment of pause, is, you know, so there are those general words that come up. And then I think that there are like very unique experiences to your context. And it could be a chicken pot pie, you know, it could be a memory that you held with friends and with, you know, people that you're near and dear to you. And so feel free to put anything and everything that you feel really resonates with these notions, right? And these visuals. And I appreciate those who did make time for that second question, which I know is really kind of the call to action from the entire session. So I know that there will be more opportunities for you all to reflect on ways to make impacts in the work beyond this. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Valerie. And all of this work is online, and there's so much more resources and things about Richmond Land's work. I really encourage you to, it's hard to pack it into 7 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever we've kind of pretended to give ourselves to do this presentation and work. So thank you, Valerie. All right, we're gonna shift gears now into our fourth and final presentation. Again, today we are hearing from 4 projects that are kind of exemplifying different practices of the cultural strategy for belonging at the Othering and Belonging Institute. My name, for those who have come late, is Evan Bissell, or not late, just whenever you came. You came on time. It's just you came when you came. My name is Evan Bissell. I'm the coordinator for Arts and Cultural Strategy at the Othering and Belonging Institute. This video is a recording, and so you will be able to go back through and click through it. And we will also make these slides available for those who would like them. So please, stay in touch, and we will have contact information and all that at the end as well. I also encourage folks at the end to sign up for our newsletter so you can stay up to date with everything that we have going on. This fourth principle that we're looking at today is we've gone through cultivating leadership, amplifying, and then the third practice around alignment. And then this fourth practice is around shift and making social and cultural change into a new common sense. And to do that, we are going to hear from the work of the Artist Circle on climate displacement. And so I'm going to pass it over to Mina, who will take us through this work now. So thank you, Mina. I'll pass it over to you, and I'll keep you moving. Here we go.
Thanks, Evan. Hello, everyone. My name is Mina Girgis. I am a senior fellow at the Institute, and I work with Evan on the arts and culture strategy. And today I want to share with you some background on our work on climate displacement, as Evan said. So first, I want to answer the question, why have we chosen to work on climate displacement at the Othering and Belonging Institute? You already know that East Coast hurricanes and West Coast fires aren't new phenomena, but their severity and intensity in recent years can be directly attributed to our climate crisis. The climate crisis is an environmental problem. However, the human displacement caused by climate disasters is an othering and belonging problem. So this is really why we think that the Institute can play a role in addressing the human displacement that's caused by climate change. Climate-induced displacement can be difficult to pinpoint and isolate because in many cases, climate is a multiplier rather than the sole reason for migration, whether it's internal within national borders or external across borders. If you ask any migrant why they left their home, they most likely won't say due to climate change. Their reasons are usually political, economic, or social. But if you dig a little deeper, you can start seeing how systemic inequities and injustices are deepened with climate change. And while in some cases communities can rebuild their homes after a hurricane or a fire, in others, their homes are gone for good. By 2050, Bangladesh is projected to lose 11% of its land due to sea level rise, affecting an estimated 15 million people. Sea level rise threatens many frontline communities across the world, like most island nations in the South Pacific. Here's a picture of Vanuatu. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, mostly in the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, you see places that are challenged with a lack of water. So Yemen's capital, Sana'a, was projected to be the first capital in the world to be deserted because it's running out of fresh water. Then the war happened, and it exacerbated Yemen's potential climate resilience. While working with UNHCR on a refugee awareness project a few years ago, I learned that there are Yemeni refugees fleeing Yemen to Somalia on makeshift flotillas, while there are Somali refugees fleeing to Yemen on makeshift flotillas. So both Yemenis and Somalis are going vice versa across the Indian Ocean. And that gives you a sense of the crisis that we're dealing with. a few years ago, you may remember that Cape Town actually ran out of fresh water. So even countries that are pre-developed are not really able to cope with some of the environmental pressures that are coming with this climate crisis. Many experts have actually seen a direct correlation between climate change and the many revolutions that took over the Middle East about a decade ago. So the Arab Spring was really kind of catalyzed by so much of this environmental unsustainability that we're dealing with in an area that is already in a dire environmental condition. So is it safe to say that all Syrian refugees in Europe are climate refugees? That's a really good question and a complicated one to answer. In 2019, a couple of years ago, El Sadiq El-Sheikh and Hussein Ayazi from our Global Justice Program published a new report about climate refugees, where they showed the connections between climate change and the increasing numbers of refugees across the world. Their report includes case studies from many countries across the world and names the corporate and political interests that are responsible for our climate crisis as petro-persecutors. Now, it's really not that direct of a correlation when you can see that, you know, the people that are exacerbating our environmental conditions and are leading to climate crisis are the reasons why we're dealing with all of this climate displacement. So Evan and I have been working on putting together an artist cohort that would work on addressing some of the framing around these issues of climate displacement. We invited 6 artists into this cohort that would meet for 6 monthly calls to discuss how artists can play a role through their storytelling in shifting that narrative around climate displacement and getting people to see at this early stage of this conversation around climate displacement what is the magnitude of this issue and how can we move both philanthropy and funding and research to take stock of this issue, this phenomena, and really kind of pay attention to what's happening in the world around human migration caused by climate displacement. Now, this issue is definitely an othering and belonging issue, because once you have people leaving their homes, you start having all kinds of questions around refugees and their rights and who caused these issues back in their home. In many cases, it's corporate interests from the global north that have affected the global south in ways that have made some of these places unlivable. So we invited 6 artists, and we were looking to really kind of understand what are the root drivers for climate displacement and see how our work, from whether it's from climate or from migration, can meet in the middle, and we can learn from each other's experiences to kind of tell the stories in a way that humanizes all of the people that have been displaced and kind of really understand what can be done about this. These are some of the framing questions that we put together, what we were doing and what we were not doing in this conversation. So what we were doing, we're really opening up these questions and asking ourselves, what can we do to kind of get momentum around these issues and to create a narrative shift, like Evan was saying, around the way we see this migration caused by climate displacement. So here I just want to share with you some of the profiles of the artists that have been participating in this cohort. Lisania Cruz, who's from the Dominican Republic. She lives in New York City and is an artist, designer, and curator, and has worked quite a bit on issues in the Dominican Republic as well as on the East Coast. She has been participating in our cohort and has been sharing a lot of her presentation about her work. We can go to the next slide. Jaisha, who might be actually with us here, she's actually participating in another learning lab about climate change right now. is based in New Orleans. She is originally from Bangladesh and has been a community activist and has been doing a lot of work around the intersection of community activism and resilience post Hurricane Katrina and all the other hurricanes. She is a co-founder of another Gulf is Possible collaborative and has been doing a lot of work around environmental justice in New Orleans and Louisiana. Alia Farid is a half Puerto Rican, half Kuwaiti artist who spends her time between Kuwait and Puerto Rico and New York, and she has been doing a lot of interesting work in the marches of Iraq, in the southern marches of Iraq, as well as a lot of work in Puerto Rico about the different groups, the different minority groups that are living in these places, and how climate change has been really making these areas basically unlivable, and how this has been exacerbated, especially in the case of Iraq, with the war and with the government policy there. Eli Jacob Fantazi is a filmmaker from Puerto Rico. He lived in the Bay Area for a long time, and when Hurricane Maria took place, he moved back to Puerto Rico and has been doing a lot of work around the way that communities in Puerto Rico have been really kind of recovering from the hurricane and rebuilding Puerto Rico. And he has been doing very interesting work on that front. You can learn more about him in his bio. Puck Lowe is a filmmaker. She went to Stanford, is based in New York, and has been doing a lot of really interesting work around environmental justice, both in New York and elsewhere in the United States. And Michael Premo and Rachel have been the principals behind Storyline Media. They have been doing a lot of work around, again, community rebuilding post-hurricane, both in the East Coast and in the South as well. And they have really kind of mastered the space of collaborative filmmaking, engaging members of the community in telling stories around how they are dealing and coping with different hurricanes. And you can also learn a lot about their work from their website, Storyline Media. So here are some questions that we have been bringing up in many of our meetings. We've had in our meetings a number of experts, including El Sadiq El-Sheikh from the Global Justice Department, present to us about their work and using these presentations to help us kind of ask questions around how can artists at this stage in this conversation play a role in shifting the narrative around climate displacement, and based on these questions, we've also had presentations by our artists sharing their work, the background on their work, and how this experience of the artist cohort has made them shift their work into new projects that kind of move more into this intersection of climate and displacement. So I want to end with leaving you with a question that I think has come after doing so much of this work. Evan and I kind of at some point realized we live by certain metaphors, and in this case, we were reflecting on the metaphor that we live by when it comes to planet Earth. I was telling Evan, you know, I have been dealing with this kind of this anxiety about, like, you know, is the world ending? Is this like, am I at a stage of agony around a loved one who's passing away? And Evan responded, you know, maybe a more apt metaphor would be dealing with someone with a chronic illness. So we realized that there are such diversities of metaphors that we're living by when we're thinking about what's happening on the planet today and what is our role in this stage. Or do we accept it? Do we support the planet as a loved friend who's passing away, or is it someone who will live like this for a long period? And there are plenty other metaphors. We've been asking people, what kind of metaphor do you feel makes sense for where we are today? And I leave you with this question. If you want to think about a metaphor that makes you live with the world today, and how do you see planet Earth and your relationship with planet Earth? So I know, Evan, you put together the mural board that we can use for everyone to share their metaphors. And I'll let you take the lead on this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mina. And we were going to jump into breakout rooms. So we'll give just a little bit of time. Instead of jumping into breakout rooms right now, we're going to just give space for people to reflect on the mural board, about 5 minutes, just to think about what murals, what murals, yes, murals, but also what metaphors do you live by as you think about the climate crisis. Take about 5 minutes to do that. And then also at this time, if you have any questions for the full group, we'll have about 10 minutes just to share questions as a group. If you could drop those in the chat. And if you could, if you haven't already, you can put a name as to who you're directing those questions at, or you can direct them at Tara. So that's T-E-R-A, and Tara can curate those as well. So we'll take about 5 minutes just to think about these metaphors that we're living by. Powerful reflections and connections. One that's saying, lifting from Valerie, we are the medicine and we are the poison. Changes in every wave. Protecting the earth is a long-term mission. Life always tends towards life. It's really beautiful. Thank you. Fire consuming a log. I am a part of a forest on fire, but I hold water. My metaphor, indigenous lead first. Great. All right, so we're gonna come back together just for the last 10 minutes. And thank you all for, there's been such great participation. And I know that this is a little bit unconventional of a format in the sense that we're doing quick presentations and then jumping into these mural boards. And so, gratitude for everyone. And if you have questions, please reach out. I am available by email, my full name @berkeley.edu. If you'd like to talk through any of these things in more detail, or if this was challenging for you, I'd love to hear feedback and how we can make it more, more informative, more accessible in different ways. So I'm gonna just ask Tara if there are any questions from the group. I haven't really been able to monitor the chat. It's been flying by. There's been a lot of little tech issues. So Tara, if you wanted to pose a question or share one that you've noticed for our group and for the panel, and then we can kind of get into it just for these last few minutes.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of questions and a lot focused on each of the different topics. One that seemed to be a really big topic in Valerie's presentation. This one is from Keisha Duthird. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this is to you, Valerie, specifically, but also to the group. In a capitalist society, how do you stop the gentrification that pushes the current community out, especially when those in power see it as a good thing?
Small question, Val.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And I did start to respond directly as a side note. So I'll just lift up, and I'm sure the other panelists can also offer that this is why integration of strategies is really important, because it's not just about advancing policies. I mean, there's a ton of policy strategies to lift up, tenant protections, to elevate that preservation is a field that can be invested in, to think about how to move, money and resources, but all of that is a moot point without really developing buy-in. Like, buy-in is so critical, and the way that you can do that requires so many different cultural strategy interventions. Like, there has to be a way that you're fostering connections with people across stakeholder groups, and there has to be a way that you're really connecting it back at the end of the day to the people on the ground experiencing it. There is a path forward for values-based development. There is a path forward for quality of life for our communities, because it's not like we're saying that we don't deserve better and that we don't want to see healthy, thriving communities. It's just about having that development be on our terms, and making sure that that development is not extractive because of everything we just heard, and making sure that it is about equity and about social justice and about quality and care and deeper public benefit. But I'm sure others can also weigh in.
Thank you, Val. Yeah, and I think all of the projects that you've heard from today deal with this economic sphere and this economic power, which consolidates, it into the hands of a few. So I'm wondering, Gio or Mina, if you want to speak a little bit to how we've been addressing or thinking about the impact of capitalism and the work around care or around climate. Caitlin, I know you have thoughts about that around the music industry and kids' music as well. But if any of you three would like to comment on that. So maybe Gio, I'll go with you first, and then Mina will go with you. How economics are coming up in care.
Yes, I'll speak to the work of one person we interviewed in particular, Sonia Passy, who works with Free From, who's really, looking at intimate partner violence work and looking at the root causes of why, what are some of the structural reasons why people do not, are stuck in those relationships. And economics are a huge part of it. And so she's really looking at how do we construct policy that informs how banks, even banking policy, is really oppressive and how it keeps people kind of bound to those relationships economically. And how do we create policy to change those, how banks operate. But also how are we, I mean, specifically in her work, she was thinking about, during the pandemic, they did a lot of, they gave cash to survivors, no questions asked. And she's really interrogating why are there so many systems of accountability in place for survivors to receive funding that they need immediately, and how that's a hindrance to often how people access funding that they need in an immediate moment. And so trusting survivors is a big through line in her work. How do we trust the people that we are working with and serving to let us know what they need? And how do we then use that to inform policy, on an institutional level to make institutions make these changes? But the banking policy work is really interesting, but just really thinking about like the levels of checking survivors, checking anyone receiving said forms of care is indeed a hindrance to people's accessing these forms of care.
Great, thank you, Gio. Yeah, I mean, that basic principle of get people what they need rather than having them prove why they need it, or, who are the levers of accountability in that way. Mina, did you have any thoughts on, we've been talking about the economic sphere and how it's influencing this work a lot. Is there anything you'd like to share, or we can take another question as well?
We can take another question then.
Okay, great.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, please.
That I was seeing reflected in the mural board as well. The conversations around like dreaming or making space for dreaming, we can talk about that here. But I think if organizations and like spaces of work for people aren't centering that, people are not going to make that space, because being at work is money. And so what does it mean for organizations, institutions, schools, places of work for everybody to make paid space for rest, for care, for dreaming, for all the things that we're talking about we need to be able to sustain and maintain? I think these like forms of care really means like there needs to be money involved in ensuring that people are getting paid for taking that space. Great.
Yeah, and maybe we'll just end it there and thinking about, what are our systems of care for each other, and just gratitude for everyone for sticking with us for 2 hours on a Monday morning, jumping in. We really, as you can tell, this group, we like to take care of each other. We love each other, and we go pretty hard and we go pretty fast. So again, the recordings will be available. We're going to drop a link into the chat for an evaluation for this session. We really encourage you to fill it out. It helps us learn and think about how we grow this work. I think that's pretty much it. I hope you get to, experience the rest of the conference. Feel free to reach out. Please also sign up for our arts and culture newsletter. We highlight a lot of these projects and other things that are happening in the world that we feel like really align with the 4 essential practices of the cultural strategy for belonging. And so we'll just hang for a couple more minutes as people check out. I think that's pretty much it. So thank you.
wind is my word, fall like water. That's my power. Let the sunshine, let it all in. For the love of my skin, let the melanin. Let the sunshine, let it all in. For the love of my skin, let the melanin. I love my skin, my skin. Watch me. Gonna let the melanin. I love my skin, my skin. Watch me. Gonna let the melanin go. Cause I've known rivers to design pyramids. I mean, I can fly like Pharaoh and Cleopatra did. I sing loudly and yes, I speak clearly. When it's about my skin, my hair, my parents, my family. Cause I'm a bird in the sky, not like a bird cage. Carving out a true path, right up the center stage. Making my voice a tradition, not a holiday. It's more than a month, yeah, my history is every day. Every day I pray 5 times, yes I do. I pray.
All right, thank you everyone. We're gonna close out the session. Have a beautiful next couple days. I hope to run into you in the hallways of the Zoom conference, and maybe we'll get to be on a dance floor together later this evening. Have a good day. Talk to you later.